We gather today to focus on the cross and the ultimate sacrifice that Jesus paid for us all. And just so you know, at the end of this reflection, I'm just going to leave it silently. Give us our own time to reflect on the cross and what Jesus did for us there. And today is a real bittersweet day, which we can see in the title, Good Friday. It's a day where we see the most horrendous suffering and pain, and yet within that there is so much hope to come. Life-changing hope for us all. And it's not always easy looking to the cross. It's hard to be reminded of what happened to Jesus on that day, the full extent of the suffering that he went through. But at the same time, it's so important that we do. And so I want to look at the 4 stages of Good Friday. First, I want to look at the time before the crucifixion. Then I want to look at the crucifixion itself. Then the death of Jesus. And then his burial, as we journey through Good Friday together. Let's pray. Father, I pray that you will bless us all in this time together today. May we have open hearts to receive from you, open ears to hear from you, open eyes that we might see you. Bless us, I pray. Challenge us, I pray, as we seek you now. Amen. For the reflection today, I've used bits from all 4 Gospels. Jesus is mocked by the soldiers. This is the first part of the day. So Jesus is handed over to be crucified by Pilate, even though he could find no fault in him. Pilate bows to the force of the people. He gives in to their cries and shouts. Tries to wash his hands of having anything to do with this. But he was the one who handed Jesus over. He was the one who had the authority to enable them to have Jesus crucified. And so before Jesus is even taken to the cross, the soldiers have him for a time of entertainment for them. For the soldiers, this was a game. They dressed Jesus up as a king, putting one of their scarlet robes around him to play the part of the emperor's purple robe. They made a crown of thorns, rammed it on his head, so that the thorns pierced him as it was rammed down, making out that it was a royal crown for a king. And then a staff would have been placed in his hand to represent the royal sceptre. And then comes the main thrust of this game. Humiliation. They mock him, kneeling down in front of him, crying out, "Hail the King of the Jews!" This is humiliation in its fullness, in front of the whole company of soldiers, of which a number of around 600 wouldn't have been unusual. This is not just a handful of soldiers, but a whole crowd of them, mocking, jeering, humiliating Jesus. And if that wasn't enough, then after the complete and utter humiliation comes the beating. They spit on him, They take the staff from him and strike him on the head again and again. He was completely beaten. He was completely humiliated before the physical journey to the cross had even begun. Crucifixion itself. Soldiers then lead Jesus away towards Golgotha, where the execution is to take place. Normally, the condemned criminal would be made to carry either the full cross or the crossbeam all the way to the place of crucifixion. But such was the beating that Jesus had endured that he was so weak, he was unable to carry that himself. And so the soldiers grabbed somebody from the crowd. We're told it's Simon of Cyrene. And he carries the cross for Jesus. Jesus just wasn't physically strong enough. But then, let's be honest, nobody who had been through the beating that he had had would have been physically strong enough. And so they get to Golgotha. They raise him up to be crucified. And through the Gospels, through all four Gospels, there are some incredible things that happen whilst Jesus is on the cross and still alive. Even as they are crucifying him, even as others are hurling abuse at him, mocking him, Jesus calls out to his Father those incredible words: Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing. He doesn't blame them. He calls for his Father's forgiveness on them. Even in his time of greatest pain and despair, Jesus prays for, cries out to his Father for those that are doing this to him. Such is his love for them. And then in Luke's Gospel, we have a more detailed conversation between Jesus and the criminals that were being crucified alongside him. One of them, we read, hurls insults at Jesus. And from a very selfish point of view, he doesn't want to be up there. If Jesus is who he says he is, then he should get himself down, but also him. Come on, if you really are who you say you are, do it. I don't want to be up here. Get me down. Whereas the other criminal's response is completely the opposite. He tells the other one to be quiet, making the incredibly valid point that they both deserve to be there. They have done wrong. Whereas this man doesn't deserve to be there. He has done nothing wrong. Jesus is innocent. And then he asks that wonderful question. Jesus, remember, or that statement he says, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And again, Jesus' response is beautiful in what he says. Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. This is why Jesus is on the cross. This is what it's about. And then in John we have that wonderful part where Jesus again shows his love and care, but this time in a really practical way. In the midst of his pain and his anguish and his suffering, he sees his mother. And his compassion and his care comes to the fore. And so to make sure that she's looked after, putting others before himself again, he puts her in the care of his cousin John, where she would find a believing and supportive relationship. Jesus was loving, caring, compassionate, forgiving, even in the darkest of times. And then we have the death of Jesus. Darkness comes over all the land, from noon until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. When it should have been bright and clear in daytime, it becomes like the darkness of the night. Jesus cries out those heartbreaking words. My God, why have you forsaken me? For Jesus to become the sacrificial lamb for us all, he had to take on all of our sin, which meant that he had to be separated from his heavenly Father, who is holy. This, I believe, was the greatest sacrifice he made for us. His own separation from God is the greatest pain that there can ever be. And Jesus was prepared to go through that, to do that, so that we wouldn't have to. How great is his love for us. And then in John we hear those words that he cries out right at the end. His last words. Words of victory, not defeat. It is finished. And when Jesus said, it is finished, he was referring not only to the work of revelation that he had brought through his words and his teaching and his signs, but also to the incredible work of redemption that he had accomplished for everyone, making the way back to God open. And to emphasize that, we know that the curtain in the temple tore in two from top to bottom, therefore opening up the way to the Holy of Holies, the way to God himself. And with those last words passed from his lips, he bowed his head and died. His final words before his death were words of victory, not defeat. And even his death had a huge impact on some. They came to break his legs to make sure that he died quickly. People could hang up there for days. But when they came to Jesus, they saw he was already dead. And so instead, they pierced his side with a spear, and out flowed blood and water. And whatever the medical or physical explanation for this, the fact is, it had a huge impact on the soldier. John really emphasises that the one who witnessed this, his testimony is true. There is no doubting what he is saying. So that we may believe. The words recorded in the other Gospels are, surely he was the Son of God. Jesus was still bringing truth into people's lives even after his death. And then we have the burial of Jesus. And even that speaks of Jesus' impact on people's lives. Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent member of the council, those who had been against Jesus, comes and asks Pilate for Jesus' body. And in doing so, he would have made his trust and belief in Jesus open for others to see. And he doesn't do it secretly or nervously. No. He went boldly to Pilate. He was not ashamed of who he was or who he believed in. What a change in his life. What a turnaround. But yet, it wasn't only him. In John, we hear that Nicodemus also went with him. Two prominent members of the ruling council who had their lives completely turned around by Jesus. And Mark, in his gospel, makes sure that we know that Jesus was dead, and that not just pretending or whatever, that there can be no doubt that he was dead. Because Pilate, when Joseph comes to him, is surprised that Jesus died, and so he sends a centurion to make sure that he is dead. And when that centurion comes back and confirms that Jesus is dead, and trust me, they would have known when somebody was dead. Then Pilate releases the body to them. They prepare his body, and then they lay him in Joseph's own tomb. Another sign of the commitment that they had to Jesus. This is the darkest moment in the gospel story. Humiliation, the physical violence that Jesus was subjected to, the pain and rejection he felt from those whom he had come to love and to show the way to. Separation from his heavenly Father, the worst part of all. And yet in it and through it all, Jesus remains loving, caring, compassionate, and above all forgiving. And there's various people in this story who react in different ways to Jesus. Maybe we need to ask ourselves, which of those are we like? Are we like the soldiers who mocked him? Are we like that thief, that criminal on the cross with him, who knows who he is and knows our own sins and cries out to him to seek forgiveness? Maybe we need a revelation like that centurion, and when he pierced his side, cries out, "This surely was the Son of God." Or maybe we want to be like Joseph and Nicodemus, who despite their positions are prepared to stick their neck above the parapet, stick their head above the parapet. They're not ashamed to be disciples of Christ. They're not ashamed to know him and to love him. And they go boldly to Pilate to make that point. A dark time. Very dark time. But there is light that is coming. That will come through the entrance to the tomb.